Once again, good morning, and thanks for making the extraordinary effort to be here this early. I was told Cape Town always starts a bit late, but looks like Joburg beats you at it. The boards of state-owned entities or enterprises have certainly been in the news, and as you know, at the State of the Nation address, the President indicated very clearly that we want state-owned enterprises and companies to be governed well, to rid themselves of state capture and corrupt practices, to place themselves on a sustainable financial footing, and where necessary to review, my apologies for that, to review the operating models of these entities. And we've repeatedly said, both in our budget vote and in various statements from government, that state-owned enterprises have a crucial role to play both in our economy, but also in respect of the development challenges that our country has. If you look at the economic front, it's in relation to Eskom, the supply of a consistent amount of electricity that both industry and households need. If you look at big entities like Transnet, the logistics of transporting not only mineral resources to export destinations, but also to various power stations in our country, and importantly, the transport of manufactured and other goods that we want to export out of the country as well. You've had a recent instance, I think yesterday, of a mining company indicating that derailment on a particular line had resulted in less volumes of that company being exported in respect of iron ore. And it's an example of the failure to operate efficiently and its implications for public entities, but also for the economy more generally as well. So in line with that, Cabinet yesterday made a number of decisions in relation to boards and the entities, and it's just a reminder that this is this minister's 86th day in office. It's the President's, I think, 97th day in office. So the following are the announcements we want to share with you, and you'll get copies of this statement in a moment. Firstly, in relation to Eskom, Cabinet has confirmed the appointment of a CEO recommended by the board of Eskom, that is the new board. So the new chief executive, in other words, no longer interim executive, chief executive is Mr. Pagamani Hadebe. And as we are talking to you, this announcement is also being shared with the Eskom staff at their head office in Megawatt Park. In the short period that Mr. Hadebe has been in office, he's, together with the board, made some important advances, particularly in relation to ensuring that those, or some of those, who've been guilty of malfeasance, which was exposed both in the parliamentary inquiry and by some of the good work that you've been doing as investigative journalists, have either resigned or they're going through disciplinary processes. Secondly, they've started introducing good governance practices within the institution itself. Thirdly, they've been looking at their finances and are now able to borrow from capital markets. And Mr. Hadebe's experience, both at the Land Bank and at the Treasury, and his stint at a banking institution, places him in a good position, together with a team that the board will put together to steer Eskom out of where it finds itself today and stabilize the institution and position it for the kind of role that it plays in our economy and in our society as well. The second is the finalization of the board, a new board for SA Express. The old board's mandate expired on the 21st of May. And the new board includes the following individuals. Ms. Typhosa Romano, she's, I think, CFO at PPC, used to be deputy chair at SAA, and she's the new chairperson of SA Express. And then you have a number of individuals whose abbreviated CVs will be given to you. Mr. Homo, Ms. January McLean, Mr. Theva, Mr. Lamola, Mr. Mpondo, Ms. Makatini, Ms. Dr. Leoka, and Mr. Basa. And these individuals have a mix of aviation experience, audit and accountancy backgrounds, HR backgrounds, and engineering backgrounds, and legal backgrounds. Mr. Basa also sits on the SAA board. So what we have here is a connection and cross-fertilization between the SAA board and the SA Express board as we begin to position ourselves to merge the three state-owned entities, SA Express, Mango, and SAA. Now, SA Express has been in dire straits for some time, and some publications over the last week or so have given you an indication of the extent of malfeasance that has been taking place there. Last week, I had to make a decision with the senior management at the department to put in an intervention team. And the job of this intervention team for the last week or so has been to really get into deep technical matters and tell us the truth of what is really going on. In other words, what's the technical capacity in this institution? What kind of malfeasance is actually going on? And there's one or two examples I'll share with you later. And do we have competent people to do the work that we actually need to do? You know that SA Express has had a number of failures over the last couple of weeks, let alone the last couple of years. And we hope we can get this right. But we must also share with you that the Civil Aviation Authority has been undertaking an investigation or inspection, I think is what they call it, at SA Express, and they might give some views in respect of their findings later today. We also announced on the 14th of May an interim board. And the reason we announce interim boards after consultation with the President is to respond to crises as they emerge at each of these institutions. And as soon as it is possible, these matters are then taken to Cabinet for confirmation. So the new Transnet board has been confirmed. The chair of the new Transnet board, as you will see in your statement, or copy of your statement, is Mr. Popo Molefe. And he is joined on the board by Ms. Letlape, who's a very seasoned executive, formerly at Eskom at the University of Johannesburg, and will have a lot to offer in this regard to Transnet. Mr. Louis van Zeyne, who was Deputy CEO, I think, at one of our banking institutions, is retired, and he's responded to the Tumamina call. And he has vast experience in audit, risk management, and financial management. Ms. Fikelepi is a lawyer. Ms. Matsoka is an engineer. Ms. Ganda is an accountant. Professor Kiswita was formerly an Eskom power station manager and an engineer. And more recently is the former chief executive of Alexander Forbes. Mr. Ramabulana, I think, has engineering experience. Mr. Dr. Mufamadi will introduce leadership and governance and ethics dimension into this board. Ms. McMenamin is an economist, currently with Mondi. Edward Motaung is obviously a lawyer, and Ms. Gratitude Rampaka is also an accountant. And they will be joined by the chief executive of Transnet, Mr. Gama. And at the moment, as you know, we have an acting CFO in Mr. Mohammadi. And the new board will be given the responsibility to start the process of appointing a permanent CFO. We then come to Denel. On the 9th of April, we announced the new board of directors for Denel, and Cabinet yesterday approved the additional board members and the board itself. So Ms. Montla Tlatla remains chairperson, and she's accompanied by Ms. Yatula, who's an accountant, Mr. Mnisi, who's a lawyer, Mr. Kunene, who's has vast business experience, previous experience in Denel, and he's also got a legal background. Professor Marwala is Vice Chancellor at University of Johannesburg, and let's call it, he's a computer scientist and mathematician. There are two former generals of the SANDF, Lieutenant General Matanzima and General Sipiwe Nyanda, who will bring in their experience in terms of what our defense force needs and get the synergies between the defense force and Denel right, so that Denel is able to respond to its major customer, which is our own defense force. Dr. Sirobe is also a very experienced business person. Mr. Sadiq is an accountant and also has some experience at Denel in his previous life. Ms. Rapkin has been an advisor to 3 successive ministers of defense and brings her wisdom and experience to the board. Dr. Sibisi is the former CEO of CSIR and currently Executive Director of the Wits Business School. So both science and business knowledge is what he will bring. Mr. Magazi, I think, is a lawyer. Dr. Nell is an engineer. And Ms. Leshloenia is an accountant as well. Now, each of these boards, some of whom I've met and some of whom I will now meet in their full form, are mandated to do, amongst other things, very clearly the following. They must undertake their duties diligently and ensure that the kind of fiduciary responsibilities that the Companies Act and the Memorandum of Incorporation and the Shareholder Compact imposes upon them is executed with absolute integrity. They must reinstill an ethical culture into state-owned entities. Clearly, we've lost a lot of ground in this particular regard. And the malfeasance that all of us know about and the consequences of state capture run quite deep. And once you have such a deep culture of malfeasance, it takes a tremendous effort on the part not just of the board, but of senior managers to get this process right. They must ensure good governance, accountability, and transparency. And here, what we want to introduce over a short period of time is that if there's, for example, a forensic report, it must be made public. So all of us know exactly what the forensic report said, whom have they found what evidence against, who must be further investigated, so that we don't have to make you work too hard to get leaks from anybody. You should be able to supply it to you on the table. And similarly, in the procurement area, we also want greater transparency and accountability. In some instances, it happens, and as you know, there have been major transactions running into hundreds of billions of rands at state-owned entities, which have very questionable processes. And excuse me. And these are things that should become matters of the past as we go along. We want to also try and encourage the right kind of relationship between boards and management. We've come across in interviewing board members of previous boards and a tendency to begin to assume operational responsibility. And sometimes it would appear it's to spend time at the entity so that they can earn more fees. Now, this is not what we want. If you're a board member, do your board work. If there is a necessity to intervene, let us know at the department and ministry, and we'll see how best to go about it. Of course, this is not, there are gray zones in this area, so we must actually understand that. They must investigate any allegations of corruption and ensure that where there's evidence of malfeasance, they deal with that evidence decisively. and where necessary, charges must be laid against individuals or entities that have benefited improperly from dubious procurement contracts with the Hawks and other sections of the police. Secondly, we expect that the prosecution authority will send out a positive and strong signal that they will act when there is the right amount of evidence prepared against individuals and entities that have been involved in malfeasance. But thirdly, the boards will also be asked to ensure that where funds are known to have left that particular entity, that those funds must be tracked down and brought back home. So recovering monies that have been lost is going to be an important function of these boards. But while they look at the past, in relation to corruption, they've also got to ensure in many of these entities that they have a keen understanding of what is happening financially. What's the cost base of the entity? What's the revenue potential and reality in each of these entities? And where are there operational efficiencies that are not being introduced, which could make a difference to the financial status of the entities themselves? We've also got to ensure that the companies do what they do in an effective and efficient way and in a financially sustainable way. And I think there needs to be a greater understanding amongst these entities that they are crucial to the South African economy in one way or the other. And that they must take responsibility for the kind of path that the President has set in terms of targets of growth, of job creation, and of inskilling people, of employing interns, and training young people in particular so that our economy has the right amount of skills, particularly in relation to the functions that these people are responsible for. The boards will also look at the executive management teams at each of these institutions. As you know, over a period of time, state capture was also about not just replacing boards with appropriate people, that appropriate meaning appropriate to the state capture objective. It was also about removing good, honest managers and replacing them. And there are many instances of that in the SOEs that account to us. So the boards must look at the executive management teams and make sure that they are individuals with absolute integrity, good business and personal integrity and ethics, and are there to serve the public cause, because essentially these are all public servants at the end of the day. And finally, the job of the boards would be to ensure that they once again establish a good name for the particular entity that they operate in, both in respect of the employees, the stakeholders of those entities, people who lend money to those entities, and above all, the South African public. I think SOEs have earned a bad name for themselves over a period of time, and this is a wonderful opportunity for leaders who occupy positions on the board to shape the way in which not only how these entities operate, but how they're perceived by the public themselves. There are still two entities that we haven't got to yet. One is SAFCO, and the other is AlexCo. And when we are ready, we'll make some announcements in that regard as well. Thank you.